Hey everybody, welcome to the DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kel. With me as always is my brother Brendan. Together we make movies with the DBS Films. Today's episode we're going into part 2 of a scene-by-scene breakdown of The Forest of Death. For those that are just tuning in now, The Forest of Death is our newest and 11th horror movie that is now live on Amazon Prime. If you go ahead, give it a rent, give it a download, give it a review, that means the world to us. And also, probably want to do that before we spoil it here, where we go through the movie scene by scene, giving you guys some insight, what we like, what we don't like, what we would fix, all of that fun stuff. As always, be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online. We make movies for our fans with our fans. If you ever want to be part of the audition process and be on set with us, you got to go ahead and find us on the Discord app. DBS Films Discord server. So, part 2 of The Forest of Death. Right now, we pick up after another montage, which is the campfire montage. And now I'm just going to keep rubbing it in now that you say that they're there, because again, I think it's absolutely perfect to have these downbeats go. So we have a little forest montage. Again, forest or fire lighting is massive. So we always recommend that is something you really want to capture with the lighting that you have, is to do any type of fire pit, anything outside. But the next real scare that we're moving into now is Tom's basically like, hey, I want to get some more drinks. Let me go upstairs, and surprise, surprise, who is there after the classic fridge scene shutting? It's our friend Roger. And I think this is really where Ben does a fantastic job and start putting Roger into kind of his own element, because really, we've done the fridge pop scare before. We've done it in few of our movies, so it's nothing that you're not really expecting too much. But there he is, it's Roger. Nice little passive scare to get you going. But then I think he immediately starts picking it up with also one of my favorite lines, which I cannot say on this podcast due to the YouTube reasons for it and monetization, but it is a hilarious line that I absolutely love. And I think it really kind of takes again that passive scare, and you don't feel ripped off. I think one of the biggest things that happens with pop scares is people will talk about pop scares and be like, oh man, like that's such a gimmick. There's always one that I point to in Pet Sematary where like they're in a basement and then like a truck drives by their window and they cut to the truck. So like if you do a pop scare that just comes out of left field like that, it almost kind of feels like you're ripping people off. But if you do it in the sense of what I feel like we saw here with Roger, yes, there was a pop scare, but it immediately goes into kind of him developing his personality, and it brings us right into the campfire lore. So what are your thoughts on the Roger pop scare and just how those passive pop scares have been playing out for us?
I think it's just seeing our growth as writers when we write these movies, and it comes back to editing as well. We need a pop scare here. And like what you said, if you watch a lot of indie films and you watch a lot of indie film companies that are new, they will do cheap pop scares. And it's just like someone smacking the window or just a loud noise, and then they just kind of forget it and move on to the next thing. I think where we are in our career, you have a pop scare, but I kind of sit down and try and figure out while we're writing this, like, how can we make this pop scare integral to the part of the story? How can it progress the plot forward with these pop scares? Because if you do that, then people don't think they're cheap, because there's a reason you're doing them. With Roger shutting, or with Tom shutting the fridge and seeing Roger, yes, it's a pop scare, but you're progressing the moonshine plot. You're also building the lore of Roger himself, where he doesn't really care. He's in there like literally using the bathroom of somebody's rental cabin. It's just showing he doesn't really care. And you're kind of building the lore of his character with some funny lines and some funny dialogue, and you kind of start to build the dynamic that Tom and Roger really do not like each other, which is a crucial aspect of this plot, because Tom has to have motivation later on in this movie to go run outside and try and beat him, not once, but twice. So immediately we knew that the only character to do this scene had to be Tom, because we have to build their frustration with each other, their hatred with each other, as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that is to essentially have the fridge shut, scare Tom, and then have Roger essentially asserting his dominance by, using the bathroom of Tom's rental cabin, just infringing on his privacy. So I think we did a really good job on that. I don't think anyone thought this pop scare is cheap. We built a lot of stuff, and I think that this scene really was a really cool scene. We built suspense. We ended with a nice little pop scare. It's a really really good sequence. And then look, they're bringing Roger down to the fire pit, and we have a very smooth transition, almost seamless, into the next scene, which is a huge, crucial scene because it's the lore building scene. And really, honestly, if this doesn't hit the fire pit lore building scene, people are going to turn this movie off, or we're going to have a lot of problems.
Yep, and exactly that. So we are basically at 20 minutes in. We've had about 3 passive pop scares. And this is now really, we've talked about this multiple times before. The scene that we're going into now, which is Roger giving us the lore, is one of the most important scenes ever. And you have to do it at least 3 times, where you sit down the audience and you tell them exactly what is going on. As we mentioned before, not a lot of people are actually paying attention fully to the movie. They typically have their phones right out next to them, and they're messaging, they're texting. And this is something that I feel like goes past, novice filmmakers and writers, because you really don't experience it until you get some of the questions of like, what's the lore, or what's going on, or I'm so confused. Even if you have those lines clearly laid out, but they just were laid out once. So this is really the first legitimate moment of sitting them down. And I think this is why that Roger fridge scare hitting is so critical. It needs to not feel like a gimmick. It needs to feel like it's progressing. It gets your blood moving a little bit. And then we basically sit you down for story time. And I think, again, huge shout out to Ben. I know you're listening to this right now, but you absolutely nailed this fire pit lore scene. This is easily one of the most important scenes. It's also the scene that's in our trailer. So, again, if the dialogue sounds like we're basically explaining the whole movie, well, that's because we are. And that's really what you need to do here. And I think, one, the strength of Roger's character carries it, but then 2, also the spooky fire pit lighting helps out as well. But I think this is by far our best lore dump that we've ever done.
Oh yeah, by far. And definitely shout out to Ben, because if he didn't come in here, if we chose another actor, I think this movie would have been dead on arrival. This is such a crazy scene. It's literally 8 minutes of intense dialogue lore where we had to kind of break it into 3 different chunks. One, you had to explain, why people don't like this forest, what kind of creatures out here. 2, we had to explain that it, essentially kills people, how it operates. We have to bring up that it doesn't like fire. So we're essentially saying, look, something's out here. These are the rules of this creature, this monster, this world that we're building. And then the third one is to tell a story, to kind of build in the audience, to kind of give Roger a little bit more character depth. And, that was kind of cool because that really wasn't in the script. We were pretty straightforward with the rules and how we wanted to do everything. And, shout out to Ben for really kind of making that a cool, engaging story. And yes, it was in front of a fire pit. Yes, the lighting was good. Yes, the character and dialogue was very good, but this could have flopped hard. And I think we did a really good job in Murder House with developing the lore and building the lore, but we did that with them walking and talking, and we kind of did it in 3 or 4 different chunks. So it was broken up by pop scares. This is 8 minutes of dialogue in front of a fire pit with no movement. So you really have to be able to engage the audience, make sure they're paying attention, and because you're giving them, difficult information to digest for the first 2. We really needed something engaging, really needed a captivating story, a real Are You Afraid of the Dark moment. And I think any other actor, or if, Ben wasn't able to improvise, or if he didn't even come up with the idea of using his wife, I think we would have had a lot of problems with this one. I think the story is what really sells it. The actors are asking questions that the audience would want to ask at that time. So I think you're kind of being engaged with the movie. And I think we did a really good job. And I think that this had a very high failure potential. Looking back on it, I don't know if I would have done it like this again, just because of how risky this was. But I think Ben came in there, hit a home run, and really saved this movie, because if it was flat or this was boring, people would have easily turned this movie off. I just don't think we had enough juice at this moment, 30 minutes into this movie, to get a lot of people to watch it. But I think Rogers is an engaging character. He's the wild card. Now you're dropping a lot of lore. And really, after this fire pit, we've set up our game plan. We have everything we need now. We've told the audience everything that they need to know so that we can kind of take this movie and crank it up a notch. And that's exactly what we did. but you can't just start, going 0 to 100 without having all the lore, all the characters, all the boring development stuff in place, because people are going to get lost and confused, which is like what we had happen with the earlier 8 movies. People just had no idea what was going on because we didn't set up and take the time to, make sure our entire plan is in motion before we went 0 to 100.
Exactly that. And like we would go to 100 by just telling you once what the lore was and not focus in on it. So really great job putting the lore into the magnifying glass and getting everything set up. Now from here, you also get character development. Dylan's kind of curious, Ashley's scared, Tracy's kind of curious too. Tom hates this, which again is what the conflict we're building. So we basically get the point where they go ahead and escort Roger off the premises via Tom, and then Tom's like, I'm gonna go get some more sticks as well too. So then this is a good, what I really like about this movie, going back to pacing, is you have that lore dump, yes, and then right away you give them just a little bit of suspense, and it's nothing too big. It's just him out there and he hears Ashley for the first time, but this is us introducing to a second character that you're hearing voices. And I think this is really important to kind of keep the ball rolling. And I mean, it's a really simple scene. He goes out there, she's like, come on. He's like, no, let me go bring these sticks back. And then he sees her and she's there. And again, we're also planting seeds, because I think one thing that we've always encountered in our movies is usually it's like, and again, Girl in Cabin 13 is like the biggest example of this, where it's like black and white of one person is like, what's going on? We need to leave. And the other person's like, no, we need to stay. We're slowly giving each character a little bit of nugget of weird to almost kind of get them kind of thinking one way or the other. And again, Tom is our anchor point of, nothing's fake. This is just me having a vacation and you guys are ruining it. But I think having that play up right afterwards, giving another angle of the shapeshifter, knowing that it's locked onto them, I like the scene. I think it really plays for just a very basic passive pop scare. Not even a pop scare, just a tension builder.
Yeah, it's a good tension builder. And once again, it's a seamless cut. The fire's going out after Roger pours his White Claw on it. He goes in the woods, picks up sticks. Here's Ashley. She's bringing up the springs again, which is a plot device for later on in the movie. And he goes back and he's, stunned to see Ashley sitting there. So it's almost the same thing. So now the audience has seen this twice. Each character has had it happen to them once, but it's not too intense as where Tom's like, whoa, what the heck? Let's go investigate, or get out of here. He's kind of drunk, and immediately the seamless transition is Ashley takes him back into the house, and they can easily chalk it up as something weird, but he's drunk. He probably heard her echo or something like that. Even Tom is not too sure of it himself. But now looking into it, or looking back at the movie, you have, Dylan's experienced the shapeshifter. Tom's experienced the shapeshifter. Ashley's about to experience Roger, who could be the shapeshifter. You don't know. So the only person in this movie to not experience anything paranormal is Stephanie, which is played Tracy, the Tracy character. And I think if we wanted to add a little bit onto this movie, I think before everything really goes crazy and they're trying to get out of there, I would have had something happen with Tracy. I think that's kind of like just a fundamental story issue. We just don't have anything crazy happening with Tracy up until the end. Which I think if all the characters experience something small that they can just kind of brush under the rug, I think it would just make a better story, especially make more impact to the final scene where they're just kind of like, hey, should we stay or should we go? Which is such a crucial moment in all these horror movies. But I think up until here, we did a really good job. The fire pit hit this one once again. We're going from a downbeat of the fire pit to an upbeat of something creepy happening. And once again, seamless transition to the next scene. Very easy. The audience doesn't have to work. We very easily could have hard cut to, the establishing shot with, the noises of Ashley in the room, but we chose to kind of blend it, and it was just a much better paced transition. I thought it was just a much better scene. The only thing I would have probably done here is maybe once again touch more on Dylan and Tracy's relationship. we kind of have them talk about, what happened to Tom and kind of say like, hey, look, he's just drunk, he's stressed out. We try to build up Ashley a little bit here, which I don't think really worked too well. I would have had them have another moment right here and built their character, built their chemistry, show that they're getting closer. Would have been like the only big change I would have had here, because I think there's an opportunity to build their relationship outside of the other two. Because it's like anytime they're alone, we should be focused on building Tracy and Dylan's relationship. And I think we kind of struck out here because they're talking about their friends. And then we go back and we do have like a little bit of relationship thing afterwards where she's like, I'm glad you're here. But it's just, I don't know, it's just not my favorite line or how we delivered it in this movie. I think we could have done a much better job if we just kind of focused it. I think you could have blended both those two scenes in there. I think the hard cut of Dylan pouring the fire out and then cutting to Ashley's noises in the room would have been a much cooler cut, better transition cut. And having both Tracy and Dylan outside still alone, I think it would have been a little bit more intimate, but it's also a little bit dangerous because that shapeshifter is out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that was actually what I was going to kind of bring up, because one of the lower laggy points now, in my opinion, looking at it as the whole thing, is you do go from they have the fire pit scene out there, and you have them kind of talking with like what went on, and like it's just them talking about Tom and Ashley not really doing much when they should be focused on each other. Then they go upstairs and she's just kind of like, I'm glad you're here, and he's like, cool. Or they make like you don't want to drink more rum shots. He's like, I'm rummed out, or whatever the line there was. So again, these are the most minor of details though. And this is, what we're improving upon. So I think it's just a little bit of a lagging there. I kind of agree. I think maybe if they were talking about potentially hearing things out there, maybe a little bit of the lore or something like that. But then we do have them go to sleep. Then we have the rough cut and we have Ashley's noises, which again, you'll have to figure out what we're referring to if you watch the movie. But this scene, I love it. I think this is a hilarious scene. I really want to get people's feedback to see what it is, but you got Tom coming back being full on Tom, and just, I think again, at least we're attempting humor. I want to see if people like it or not, but at least we're attempting humor as a way to get a downbeat moving. And on top of that, it gives us a reason for why Dylan can't go to sleep. So he rolls a blunt, so he goes outside, which is the most important part. But do you want to talk about the setup downbeat to the active beat of him going outside? Because I think that's really what I'm seeing the differences in this movie is. Those downbeats not only transition very well, but they pull you away from the movie's, intensity enough to really set you back up to be like, okay, they're going back outside. Here we go again.
Yeah, I really like this scene. I think it's classic 80s horror. Obviously we don't have the ability due to, being on AVOD platforms to have nudity or any kind of over the top stuff like you would see in 80s horror movies. So we wanted to try and like show some of that stuff or throw some of that stuff in, which is what we did. If you watch the movie, you'll kind of see what we kind of did. But I do really like the scene with Tom because there's very little dialogue. I don't think he says anything, and it shows just to his character, like what he's all about. Like he really is very self-centered and he only cares about himself, and he's just fine with just kind of, using the whole cabin as his territory, which I think lends very well for the story. When you have Roger encroaching on his territory, he gets very upset. So I do think it's a very small scene, but you're layering the movie, and I think creating depth of the movie is so crucial, so important. And I think it's really the devil's in the detail. I think the difference between a good movie and a great movie is just the extra time and attention to some of these smaller scenes like this. Because really, the only point of this scene is to just have a nice transition of Dylan can't sleep in and going outside so we can get the next pop scare. But what we did was we did a little throwback to 80s horror. We had a cool scene, a funny scene with Tom that kind of developed his character a little bit. And then we showed, Dylan essentially what he does to cope when he can't sleep. And we had another cool little montage in there. And then, he's outside. And that's all we needed to do. But that could have easily just been a hard cut of Dylan outside, after his conversation with Stephanie. We could just hard cut on a lighter. And I just don't think you would have had the same impact of, the depth that we had with this one. So I was very happy with it. I thought it was a really cool sequence. Um, and I thought it was pretty funny. I think that the feedback, from my point of view, is I really liked it. I thought it added a lot to the movie. And I'm excited to see what other people think that aren't part of the Discord or part of our immediate DBS family, because I do want to see, the reactions to this kind of stuff.
Definitely. So again, that just sets us up for, I think, is a really good and classic pop scare, especially with any kind of like shapeshifter or skinwalker. I mean, there's a classic version of this pop scare that we do in the Hateful Eight, and a lot of them. It's basically Dylan's outside, he's smoking his blunt because he cannot sleep. And what does he see outside? It's Tracy. That's so weird. She's calling towards him. So he's walking towards her. He's walking towards her, puts the hand on her, turn around. That's not Tracy. That is Sid, our shapeshifter. And then we cut to him waking up. And this is a classic horror scare. This is the bread and butter right here. And, everyone's like, oh, be original. No, you don't get to be original until you literally learn the fundamentals. And this is a fundamental pop scare. And I think it's executed very, very well. I think it has a good reason for it to occur. It has a good reason for it to be out there. And I always say I'm a huge fan of dream pop scares because you get like one. You get one for free, in my opinion. And what was it? Well, he couldn't sleep, so he smoked. So he went outside. So I love it when you kind of blur the lines of when did they fall asleep. If you make that like they wake up or they're already sleeping, I think that's way more justified. Because again, if you feel like you're gypping someone and like they just randomly throughout the day wake up and it was a dream, but there's like no lead up to it, I think that's when you kind of get into that cheap area of the scare. But I think this was a very well executed one. I think it builds a lot of suspense. We've already done our homework in the sense of establishing that there is a shapeshifter out in the woods. Roger told you about this shapeshifter, and now he is seeing Tracy out in the woods where it is dangerous at night. So I think this is just a classic pop scare that we executed perfectly.
Yeah, this is my favorite pop scare of the movie. I really like it. I thought the transition was great. I really like the cinematography in this one where he's like out there and he's like smoking the cigar or the cigarillo out there. The lighting is cool. And then his whole trek and walk towards her, just seeing her standing there, like illuminated in the forest, is super creepy. And the hand touch on the shoulder, it's been done a million times, it'll be done a million times more. But I thought we did a really good job with it. And it's a very active pop scare that once again could be, brushed under the rug because it is a dream. And I thought we did a really good job with that. It doesn't really make any sense at all if you think about it, because how does he know what Sid looks like or anything like that? We never bring it up, but we're making horror movies. We're not here to, make these crazy movies that have super deep plots and everything. This is just a nice pop scare. And so, like, here's the thing. You can overanalyze when you're making movies. You can worry about a lot of things. I used to do it a lot. And this is probably back in the day if I was, really kind of, back in the day of like learning how to make movies, I would have been like, no, we can't do this because it makes no sense at all. It's a huge plot hole. How does he know what Sid looks like? And out of all the thousands of reviews that are probably going to gather for this movie, I don't think anybody's going to even bring it up. And I think it's just something where it's just like, this is what he dreamt. So what, maybe it's just some kind of psychic connection in the forest. Maybe Redwood Forest has some kind of paranormal connection. There you go. Plot hole fixed. So I do think the learning lesson here is if you're a new filmmaker, sometimes you kind of overanalyze and, you think your audience is going to give you 1 stars for stuff that's really not that big of a deal. And yes, there are certain things that people will get very offended by. But for the most part, if you've done a lot of these movies, and as long as you're avoiding those kind of crucial mistakes, you can kind of get away with small stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, and it's something you get used to because like we'll have a lot of times on set where like someone will mention something, they'll be like, "Well, how does this happen?" We're like, doesn't matter." Obviously, though, if you listen to the Roger lore, he's mentions once it gets in your mind. So clearly, Sid has telepathic ways. So try to come at me with that one, internet. That is a plot hole that we have fixed right here, right now. So again, it's a really, really smooth scene. I think it is that transition process there. We have them wake up and surprise, surprise, it's another montage. And I mean, again, I think they're fine. I didn't even notice. I'm sure because you were editing it, it's kind of more in your head, but they're out there, they're playing drinking games. One thing I will say, because it's the podcast, so I'm going to say it, you guys were playing the flip cup. You guys were playing flip cup wrong. So you guys were literally playing a game of flip cup wrong with it upside down. And we cut it so you can't see that. But I just want this for the record that when I was reviewing the film, I saw a whole bunch of people playing flip cup upside down. So that's just my little nugget to get out here. I think it's great though. It goes back to upbeat. I mean, it almost kind of like shows you like these montages of like what they were hoping for with the actual trip. So I think it is fun. It's upbeat. It's a great way to do B-roll, and I think it looks great too. So then here comes probably what my biggest, if I had to rate the scenes 1 to 10, and you had to get some low ones, this will probably be my lowest scene, which is the Tracy and Dylan photo scene. Now we needed to set this photo scene up because there needed to be things in the background, but I mean, and again, massive credit to Dylan, massive credit to Stephanie, absolutely amazing job. But it's just an awkward scene, awkward conversation, in my opinion. I kind of get it where she was, trying to be like, oh, for my Tinder profile, but like I'm not, because I don't really want to see you. I'm doing this to not see you, so I need you to take my Tinder profile so I can see other guys or something along the lines of that. And then Dylan just being like, okay, I'm a photographer, here we go. But I would say of all of the scenes we have, this is probably the weakest one, in my opinion, dialogue and downbeat wise. And it just really reminds me of some of our earlier works in the Hateful Eight. And I think the big one from that is just like the unneeded tension. And I think that's kind of a beginner writing thing where like, she flicks them off and whatnot. And like, I feel like you get that a lot more from some of our earlier movies. And it just almost, I don't know if it's like flashbacks for me, but that's just kind of the feel I get when I come through this scene. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the character development of Tracy and Dylan in the woods?
Yeah, I think the problem with this scene is twofold. Number one, it's way too late in this movie to have this scene. I think you could have easily taken this scene with the photography and moved it after to the first montage where they're hiking in the woods. Just have them all do it out there. Dylan could be taking photos out there, and you can sneak this little scene in here where you have the beginning development of Tracy and Dylan's relationship. And then you have Tom say, hey, I know how to get back, and, just move this scene completely forward in the movie. And I think it'll really change the dynamic. I think why this doesn't work now is because, they're supposed to be flirty a little bit, and it's too far in the movie. They've spent too much time to really be talking like this. And I think it's just kind of awkward. And number two, it really is supposed to be more fun and sarcastic and flirty, and it just wasn't hit. And that's just, I think the dialogue and the tone of this scene was not the best. And I think my direction on this one was not the best. I remember being concerned with the sun going down at this moment. We actually shot this one very late. And I was just more concerned with getting it than, I should have been with just making sure that they were, in a more flirty kind of mood. But it's just, that's tough, man. Like, you can give that scene to the best actors and they're going to struggle. I would have just done something else. You could see what we were trying to do, which is incorporate the photography and the camera in it. But I think if you would have moved this forward in the movie and had more basic conversation about Dylan being the photographer and him asking her questions, I think that would have been just fine. I don't think you need to really push it or try and do too much. I think that this one's just awkward because we were really trying to ramp up their dialogue and their flirty and their chemistry, because we waited to, 35 minutes into this movie to really kind of develop it. And I think that's just the huge problem is we're going 0 to 100 in, the chemistry building thing. And, romance is like horror. You have to kind of have the plot points and the downbeats, and it has to be a slow, gradual increase in chemistry like it is in tension, suspense, and horror. And I think we just didn't develop anything until we tried now, and it came out as awkward and just not good. So I do think this is one of the lower scenes on this movie. That being said, it's like 30 seconds. It's not anything. We developed it, and we got our objective done, which is just take pictures so we can use it for the next scene. And this one doesn't really transition well because look, I used a hard cut tonight. So it wasn't, I probably could have been more clever with the transition here, but we got the job done, and that's all that matters.
Exactly that. I mean, scene by scene breakdown, we gotta go through each and every one of them. I do like what you were saying, because I think that is the major issue, is it feels like the relationship's kind of going in reverse. Like this would have just meant so much more in the very beginning when, she still has the idea of like, I'm not letting him sleep with me, as like from the beginning phone call to, I'm glad you're here, which is what we've already had. It feels like they're going in reverse. Whereas as you mentioned, if we had them doing the photography earlier, right after the montage, you could have made it where like Tom is like, Dylan, take pictures of me and Ashley, like, very Tom like I need more pictures of me and whatnot. And then like you could even make a joke where maybe Tom wants one by himself just in case that he breaks up with Ashley. Like that could have been a good one that I just thought of right now.
I mean, you could have had Tom do the Tinder joke. He could have been like, hey, I got to change my Tinder profile. He's like, yo, you're like dating her. He's like, yeah, I mean, you never know. Like that. I mean, easily small changes that can make this movie better. But you really, once again, you don't know this stuff until you get a finished product and you upload it. You just don't know.
Watch your Shapeshifter 2.0. We're gonna have the photography scene early.
Shapeshifter 2.0 will definitely have this photography scene. I will definitely have Tom say that, because that is absolutely hilarious, and it's a Tom thing to say. He's just like, you never know. And he's like asking about his dating profile stuff.
You never know. You never know what. Maybe you could get hit by a bus, babe. Jeez. So with that being said, it does, feel a little bit off there. And then you have Dylan maybe be like, hey, let me take a picture of Tracy. Then they warm up. So I would say that is the lower one, but it does set up perfectly for what the next scene is. But unfortunately, you will have to wait until the next episode, because that is going to be the end of this one. We're going to have part 3 and part 4 coming out next week. Again, be sure to watch the Forest of Death, because it really helps out, especially now when we're just getting started with the launch of the movie. Be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online, because we make movies for our fans with our fans. So if you ever want to be part of our movies on set, that is the place to be. But until then, have a good one.